my menopause journey. It was the embracing of my intuitive as well as my rational self, that I was more than just my mind. And it's not like my intellect was the top of a pyramid of a hierarchy, which was how I had looked at it most of my life. Um, but a recognition that I am a whole person and that all aspects of me are gifts to be valued, and that I am more effective, more wise, um, when I trust and draw from the whole of me.
Beautiful. Há quem veja o invisível, há quem faça o impossível. Depois de tudo, alguma coisa vem dizer que tudo bem. Welcome to the Menopause Retro Journeys. So this is a series where I get together with women from various backgrounds and kinds of walks of life, and we get to go back to their menopause stories. We revisit those years and we go and have a look at the ups and downs and the experience, how it was for them. And what I'm particularly interested in this series is to connect the dots going back, because we can maybe find some gems and wisdom nuggets that this part of their lives has come up with. And especially, I want to trace maybe new ways of being that emerge after post-menopause, and these can kind of trace and give us a direction for the second half of our lives. So I'm your host. I am Ioanna Matsouli. I'm the creator of the Menopause Codex, and today my dear guest is Peggy Holman. Welcome, Peggy. And
Thank you.
I will read a little bit your bio and tell you what Peggy has been up to in the last few decades. Yeah. So Seattle-based author and consultant Peggy Holman has helped explore a nascent field of social technologies that engage whole systems of people, from organizations and communities, in creating their own future. She is a recognized leader in deploying group processes that directly involve hundreds or thousands of people in achieving breakthroughs. She has worked with a variety of organizations, including tech, biotech, government, nonprofits, and others, where she consults on strategies for enabling diverse groups to face complex issues by turning presentation into conversation and passivity into participation. Another thing about Peggy is that in 2001, she co-founded Journalism That Matters with 3 other journalists, right? And Journalism That Matters has built a national coalition of journalists, educators, reformers, and others to support people who are reshaping the emerging news and information ecosystem. To date, Journalism That Matters has hosted 18 national discussions on this changing news ecology, sparking numerous initiatives that are influencing the new media landscape. And she's the author of 2 books, The Change Handbook and Engaging Emergence. In the second edition of The Change Handbook, Peggy joins her co-authors to profile 61 innovative engagement processes used by organizations and communities to uncover creative responses to complex challenges. This Change Handbook, I actually got this about 15 years ago. It is the Bible. It's considered the Bible, right? For leaders and consultants who work to increase resilience, agility, collaboration, and aliveness in their organizations and communities. And in her second book, which is called Engaging Emergence and Turning Upheaval into Opportunity, This book won the 2011 Nautilus Gold Book Award for Conscious Business and Leadership, by the way. In this book, she dives underneath these change processes that was in the first book, right? To make visible the deeper patterns and principles and practices for change to guide us through turbulent times and people to come together and turn disruptions into possibilities. What I really loved when I read on your website, you start by saying, Peggy, I have been fascinated by change for as long as I can remember. It has been central to my work since the mid-1970s. So, welcome. It's a real joy to have you and to go back to your story, Peggy. And the reason I was drawn to invite you for this conversation together is because I want to talk about the change as we know it as the menopause that women go through around their 50s. It can be a bit earlier, a bit later. And I find it fascinating that you have worked on the field of change, emergence, disruption, and collaborative social dynamics as well, which is amazing. So I think it's going to be very interesting to kind of bring all this experience and wisdom and knowledge that you have from your life work with change and all these processes that are involved with change, but with organizations. And we talk about menopause and the change in our own womanly bodies. So how would you like to tell us a little bit about how menopause was for you? Going back, just give us a little bit of how did she turn up in your life? Did you have specific moments you remember, you recall? Just feel free, and we can take it from there, the conversation.
Right. Thank you. Thank you for that introduction. As I was listening to you, I think part of what I was realizing is the nature of my work went a long ways to prepare me in a way I don't think I quite appreciated at the time. My earliest memories of thinking at all about menopause was actually when my sister, who is 9 years older than me, started going through menopause, and she kept trying to tell me about it, warn me about it, and I kept saying, I don't want to hear it. I know I'll have to deal with it sometime, but I don't want to deal with it now. And it so in a way, I was kind of protecting my last years of not having to think about it. And it probably began showing up. That part is fuzzy, but I'd say late 40s.
Mm-hmm.
I'm almost 69 now, so almost 20 years ago, or about
Yeah.
20 years ago. And it started showing up mostly in terms of hot flashes.
Mm-hmm.
And I can remember winters where I'd be wearing a turtleneck, a sweater with a turtleneck, and I would just want to tear it off of my body. So that was a very early memory. But the places where I think I really began to admit something was going on was about the time I was able to actually place the date when it really came to the fore at about age 50, because I was on my way to a conference uh, with two very dear friends that took place in Halifax with a system change process that I still work with called open space
Right.
technology.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the annual gathering was in Halifax that year, and the three of us had gotten together. And I remember very clearly it was about that time. I think there were three three aspects that showed up big time for me that when I was really in the heart of it. One was the hot flashes that I already mentioned. They just continued to get worse. And that thing of waking up in the middle of the night just soaked through and the sheets being soaked through. Um, it's very vivid, even 20 years uh, 20 years later. But a big one at that time was I stopped being able to sleep. And I remember in the beginning of that just um, just being in a terrible state of mind because I couldn't get any rest. And then there was a turning point that really came from understanding the patterns of change that I saw in my work, which was to, find a different way of looking at it rather than berating myself for not being able to function. It was like my rational mind went on vacation. It was utterly inaccessible to me. I'd always been able to do math in my head uh, without thinking about it. And it just simply disappeared. And that, by the way, has never come back. The crisp ability to deal with numbers and hold many details. I can't do it as I used to pre-menopause. But um, my relationship with sleep, rather than staying so frustrated at it, a breakthrough for me was to let go of it and to begin to look at this as a period of really deeply developing my intuitive nature because that was all I had. And so, when I woke up in the middle of the night, rather than trying to force myself to go back to sleep, I would get up and read, or I'd journal, or just use that time in a different way. And that changed everything about my relationship to what
Oh,
was going on. Because rather than being frustrated and angry, I just got curious
yeah.
and said, what does this have to teach me? And um, with that, there was probably a 2-year period where I got very little sleep. And I just simply worked it into my way of being. And it really was a period of beginning to trust my intuition and to be more welcoming of the unexpected. And it fit very well with the nature of um, the kind of work and change I was doing, which is really about, being compassionate with yourself and others, getting curious
Mhm.
when disruptions take place, and getting clear about what questions I was asking, which provide a red thread to follow through, and being open to what shows up and who shows up and working with it. So that attitude shift, and I'd had a commitment to to meditation before that, but it really deepened that commitment to take that quiet time. Uh, I'd I'd sit for 20 minutes in the morning
Yeah.
to really ground, and that helped provide a haven for me, particularly during that period where sleep was so impossible. Um, the other thing that I found that helped with hot flashes, and I'd been I've been practicing yoga for about 25 years, and early on I'd run into something called the Tibetan rites, which are a series of 5 exercises that um, take under 10 minutes to do. And when when I attend to my breathing in doing those, the hot flashes stopped.
Ah,
Um, and it was the only thing I ever found. And that made me quite rigorous about doing them every morning because if
so
I
it sort
didn't,
of regulated your system, the breathing, right? Because I think the hot flashes is more of yes, there are the hormonal, the progesterone, estrogen, all these testosterone, all these
yeah,
going a little bit havoc. But at the same time, the hot flash is actually your system going in fight or flight mode. So if you found a way to regulate, to breathe, to it's the regulation, that's really interesting what you're saying with the breathing.
it was partially about breath, but it was also, when I made the connection that that was what was eliminating the hot flashes. Of course, I read and did some research on the Tibetan rites, and it turns out that they regulate the endocrine system, and
Ah,
uh, two of their five moves. One is spinning, which centers. Excuse me. The other four, two of them stretch the the adrenals,
mm,
and two of them expand the adrenals. And so um, that regulation of the endocrine system apparently, at least for me, made a difference in
wow,
terms of eliminating hot flashes.
amazing. So I'm
So,
interested to know more about the Tibetan
yeah,
rites myself,
yeah,
but it's because yeah, and the story with the adrenals is as well that we are all by our 50s, we are running a high, having very
mhm,
busy lives. So the rest regulation, the capacity of our system to rest is actually we push our limits so much. So when
yep,
actually the other hormonal stuff kick in, we are not at the a relaxed state in the adrenals to be able to cope so that the system so then he and then he goes like and the system goes burns and says okay now
yeah,
I think that's more or less what is going on biologically but also the processes that happen in the body, huh?
yeah. And I think the combination of meditation and the hot flashes, or not the hot flashes, the Tibetan rites, um,
Yeah.
um, that that it provided um, both the biological
Mm,
and kind of the an emotional center
yeah.
that enabled me to be like the reed in the wind, whatever was going on around me. It provided a means of um, being present to myself and
Right.
my environment,
Yeah.
such that I could. I mean, the nature of the work that I do is holding space for what needs to emerge, to invite it. And so this required me to find a practice that worked for me as an individual in order to be of service in the work that I do in the world.
Were you at the time aware that you were going you were like participating in all these big open space technology, meetings with hundreds of people like facilitating and everything and holding this space, which is amazing because they come from all these diverse fields and the whole, if I remember the little bit that it's everything and everyone is the at the right time at the right place. Yeah, there's this principle that everything there's nothing that's out of place, but it will be exactly what needs to happen, right? As
Yeah,
part of the I don't know what you call it, one of the tenets of that technology.
yep.
Were you at the time aware that personally going through menopause, this was your individual change process, which I'd say there's midlife, but also for women, is this biological? I don't know. Do you think it's a disruption Or is it something that, because from your work, I love what you're saying, that change is the gate, disruption and change, they come together.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
actually
Disruption
innovation
is the doorway to change.
and innovation or the new cannot appear unless there is something that disrupts the old, right? So
Right. I mean,
so
there's no point in changing if everything is smooth. So
yeah. So do you think that the process, the biological process of our hormonal system coming to a halt actually, and then restabilizing in a lower level? We don't have these ups and downs of hormones every month around, yeah, the 50s of something in the. Do you think it's a disruption? And were you at the time making the analogies of what you were working with all these facilitating these big groups and going through yourself the process? uh,
I,
what I'm asking it is like, it's a little bit
yeah,
of a stretch, but it's an
yeah.
interesting, you're in
Um,
a unique
I,
position to answer this.
I, I think I was aware of the parallels. It's clearer to me now. Um, but the I was aware that I was applying the tenets of my work to what was going on for me personally.
Mhm.
So in that sense, I think I had a good deal of awareness of it's like, okay, I, I'd had enough people tell me that the patterns that I was articulating, although as I think about it, the work of writing engaging emergence came a few years later. So I wasn't as conscious of the patterns of change as I was going through it. Um, but certainly the principles of open space that you were just referring to, I had been part of a community of practice called Spirited Work that was really exploring the question of what is it like to be a spiritual being in a material world? How do we reconcile those things? And living living by the principles of open space were a pathway that we did. That Spirited Work ran in open space. We met once a quarter from a Thursday evening to Sunday afternoon in open space. And each season uh, was guided by the four archetypes of Angeles Arian, um, who did a book called The Fourfold Way. And so winter is the season of the warrior, which is really about leadership. And uh, the spring is the season of the healer, which is about follow what has heart and meaning. Uh, the summer is the season of the visionary, tell the truth without blame or judgment. And the fall is the season of the teacher, be open, unattached to outcome. So the season the warrior is show up and be present. And so those seasons guided our activities. Open space was the the framework for how we worked.
The modality,
And
how you communicate, how you
yes,
held the
yes,
dynamics, right?
yes. And that pattern was certainly informing the way I was approaching, what was going on in my body. And and by the way, I'm in a 35-year marriage at this point, and so I also had the the benefit and the challenge of living with another human being while going through menopause. That was both a reflection of my. I had forgotten this until you started talking about the emotional fluctuations, because there were definitely highs and lows, and in retrospect, I'm convinced our hormones, particularly during that period where they are so dysregulated, um, uh, control choices and decisions
Yeah.
far more than the rational mind. And I look back at choices that I made during that period and think, what was I thinking? Um, and it's only with distance that I can look back and say, you know, that wasn't either my emotional or my rational or intuitive side. That was hormones, you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
leading leading me down strange paths.
For sure, which is why the practices that you mentioned, the Tibetan rites, or anything that helps you regulate, anything that helps you come and reach something that is a quiet space where you are with the space rather than the fluctuations, where that helps you to not focus on the fluctuations but on the rest, the space. It helps.
It
And
it yeah.
you mentioned the four seasons, and it was interesting that you worked, or the woman that wrote the book, that and you related it to different archetypes, because um, when I was doing research on menopause, of course, in the East, they call it the second spring, because there the position of the women in society, they are more revered because they enter the age of the elder. So it's they don't have symptoms. So the narrative and the way the stories we tell about it and the way we relate to the whole thing, yes, there are the ups and downs, but these can also be accentuated by a very busy mind, busy life, like more in the West, and also society that tells you that maybe, okay, you're losing your mind rather than you are going to be a revered elder. So it's a different uh,
Interesting.
reframing, right?
Yeah.
But I went along with that idea that there is a second spring, and I realized that actually menopause is like your winter solstice, because it's the time when you really need to go, and it kind of it can bring you to a halt with yourself before then you can be reborn. So there is a sort of um, darkening. There is a more of a, yes, there are the ups and downs, but that's what we're saying. The where you put your focus is, if to go embrace them, is like your relationship with your work with change,
Mhm.
and see what are the possibilities, or how else can I see this, that I can be with it rather than
Yeah.
against it or fighting it, or
Yeah.
right.
That said, there's definitely mourning involved. I mean, I prize my rational mind and my ability to do numbers in my head, and I still mourn the loss of that.
uh,
And
yeah.
I mourn the loss of an almost eidetic memory that is long gone at this point. And what I remember now is not the details of his situation, but its emotional center. Um, and I work in a far more intuitive way.
Mm.
Um, I did ultimately recover my capacity to work from the rational, but I'd say what I am able to do today is I have access to both. Um, the and and being able to, in essence, consult the different aspects of myself is something I highly prize. Um, but I do mourn the loss of having that ability to remember crisp detail.
Yeah.
Um, I also, my hair used to be really curly, and as the hormones changed, it it's now wavy. It looks pretty straight right now, but um, I never
I
get what
had
it's for.
was interviewing another woman, and she told me the exact opposite. I used to have like nice straight hair, now it's all curly. um,
It's
yeah, these are yeah. How was it for you when in the because uh the natural changes with the aging process? How did
yeah,
you relate with this and the fact that yeah, change is the only constant, right? And then that we change, and then our body as well gets older, and even yeah, menopause is a marking period where a lot of things um, um, get reset, not just physically. I think in all our bodies, you know, the emotional, the mental, or you said you went more intuitive, so you do more in your capacity to go more to the more left brain, but maybe your right brain is more is having bigger access now to more data that is maybe more valuable than just um I don't know. These are all, I have so many questions to ask you.
yeah. Um, I, I don't. One of the skills I've always had and I prize is the ability to see patterns.
Yeah.
And I used to do it in a very different way because I could hold more detail in my mind than I can now. But I can still make use of you know writing writing things down or drawing or I have to use external aids in a way that I didn't used to, but I can bring more of an intuitive leap and then go back and you know look logically at is that supported by what the data tells me. So I'd say I've learned how to dance between the the rational and the intuitive over the years in a way that I value. And is that answering your question?
Yeah, yeah, I had two questions at the same time because
Yeah,
we talk about so many things. I was just like
yeah,
sometimes I have a hard time just to keep it clear. So one was about the mind, yeah, like in what you're saying about the no, I was mentioning in this more as part of the change process of aging, where yes, our minds, where we are not. It sounds as well that it seems like you lost the capacity, but at the same time, we're more attached to our heads
yeah.
younger. That I think menopause comes along and really blows this up in ways. It's not just hormonal; it's a reset. So, and if your system, your body system, has settled and has regulated and found a new equilibrium in a
Yeah.
place where maybe you are more intuitive, which is also maybe wisdom, where wisdom can come through, because wisdom is not mental, is it?
I heard wisdom once described, or intuition once described as the whispers of past experience. And I think wisdom draws on intuition
Mm.
a good deal. Um, and I would say, in terms of the question of aging
Yeah.
and how, which I think was the thread that I lost earlier, I have less attachment and more curiosity.
Wow.
You know, I am much more willing to let go of expectations and be present to what's going on in the moment. And where I find myself attached, it can be a very conscious process of, you know, it, digging into what am I really attached to here, um, and letting go of it, which, can definitely involve mourning. I
Yeah.
mean, it certainly can involve loss, but my capacity to find peace in that
Yeah.
and curiosity about what's now possible, um, that wasn't. Um, and there's kind of a philosophy of not working quite so hard, in the sense that if I'm really trying to force fit something, rather than keeping at it and single-mindedly trying to dig deep into it, I am much more likely to take a deep breath and step back and ask a question that is fundamental in the work I do, which is, what's the purpose here? What what is the intention? And given that intention, what best serves? And that kind of opening, um, and um, that that is a discipline I'd say I've developed over the past number of years, is when it seems like I'm working really hard or struggling with something. It's take a breath, get clear about purpose and intention. And purpose tends to be more rational, intentional, more intuitive, which is why
Oh,
I tend
nice.
to,
I like what you say. Yeah.
in I use both terms. And I have to credit a dear friend and colleague and someone you should interview, or
All
I'd
right.
suggest you interview Tova Avabuk, who is an Israeli friend and colleague, who, you know, tease those two aspects apart. Um, but
Yeah.
it's, for me, it is an exploration of both the rational, intuitive sense of, in, why do this? So purpose and intention, and that provides the grounding from which to step.
This is
And
beautiful. That's beautiful. And it's this is maybe it would be nice if you um, share with us some of those tenets that you use in your change facilitation work, that you do, and how these can help on an individual level. Because this can be from your personal experience that, for example, this what you say is really important, because we do tend to get stuck, and that's when, I mean, no matter the age, the
yep,
curiosity is another one. That's like, what, be curious about the situation. um and then what you said something as well is interesting about the loss, because around that age, loss can be about losing other people, losing dear ones, because or your children going away. So there's a loss having to do in the relationships, but you
yep.
spoke a lot about a loss of a capacity of yours, that is a mental um, faculty, that you had very sharp, and that you noticed the change. And at the same time, there's this work of this. I've only seen a little bit of his work. Francis Weller, I think, is called, on grief, and he talks about loss. And there's this amazing video where they really do say that in ancient times, grief was, it was something you do, or when there was loss, something you do with others. It's not something that you face yourself, crying and being in this deep place of despair, and it's something that is to be shared. So this is something that we've lost as a society, meaning some of these things that you mentioned. um, I'm sure there's many other women, but then they can be as well, maybe facilitate and hold the space to hold all these different ways, these different losses. And is it really a loss, or is it, what is it that came that counterbalances, or what is it that you gained? um so yeah.
So I have many things. I'm going to put a placeholder on talking about the framework for change that works at the level of the individual, as well as the level of the collective. Just to speak to grief for a moment, um, and I don't have children, so I think that may be part of the reason when I talk about loss, it's more about capabilities, because I didn't have the experience of children leaving a home and you know that kind of loss. And I do think it is important to acknowledge and feel loss. Yes, other things fill it, but it doesn't dampen the emotional reality of something that that mattered to you no longer being there for you.
Sure.
And there's something enormously valuable about accepting stepping into loss. And interestingly, when Harris Nowen, who created open space technology, the process that has been an enormous influence since I ran into it in 1996, not just as a meeting methodology, but as a framework for living. Um, Harrison's first explanation of why does this thing, where basically the essence of open space is an invitation to take responsibility for what we love as an act of service. And it is a process that liberates human spirit like nothing else I've ever run into. I mean, how often in our lives are we invited to really attend to what we care most about? And interestingly, on the outside, some people say, well, that's being selfish. In fact, what I have seen in 30 years of practice is that the things that we care most deeply about dive deep into a handful of human values that are all shared. And as such, our human desire to contribute shows up. So the things that when we follow that invitation to take responsibility for what we love, it is always an act of service.
I love
Uh,
what you
that
said. This is beautiful. I've been
that's
taking
been
notes.
my experience. And I took myself on a slightly different path. When Harrison was looking originally for ways to describe, why does open space work? Why does this thing where we invite people to self-organize around what matters to them actually work better than when we try and control our way through? Um, his first explanation for it was using Kubler-Ross's grief cycle.
Oh, I don't know about that one.
And it's uh, uh, maybe it's big in the uh, Western world, but she talks about the stages of grief as first denial,
Yeah,
then anger, and then depression, and finally acceptance, so letting go and acceptance.
yeah.
And it does tend to describe the evolution of the kinds of conversations that take place when when running an open
All
space. Is
right. All right.
people show up with needing to empty, um, and that tends to be both expressing the grief, the anger, the sadness, uh, and then they start thinking about what they might want. Um, and then they start talking about how they might go about creating it. And it's a natural cycle you know, when we're given a focal question around which we gather. So, um, ultimately, explanations that are both spiritual and the science of complexity. I mean, the process of self-organizing can be explained through any one of those. And you looked like you wanted to say something.
No,
So,
I was coughing, so I turned it off
okay.
because so I don't destroy the audio. Yeah, sorry
Um,
about that.
so I'll say something. I've dropped a link in the chat here to an article I wrote about 2 years ago, which is in some ways a synthesis of what's in my book, Engaging Emergence. This is a kind of a short version with uh, with a little simpler frame. And this is the way I now talk about designing for change. Um, and it starts with disruption. So when we're faced with disruption, rather than our typical instincts are to want to suppress it or deny it or control it. And those things typically, unless you're dealing with a technical kind of broken part, if you're dealing with something larger that really requires a shift in how we think about it and what we do, um, that disruption is a signal to me to create a space that holds compassion and curiosity. And I find there are three actions that enable that. And we've been talking about them in the way. The first is to find a focus, get clear about purpose. And I like to think about purpose through a generative question, which is a question that we don't know the answer to.
Mhm.
It requires a diversity of people who care, um, and acts as a way of focusing. So it provides direction. It's an attractor for others to join you. And in that sense, it's an invitation.
Before you carry on, may I say something? Because I interviewed this other woman. They did menopause circle, so then they were meeting every year, and she was saying that they were a very diverse group, and they were coming from many different places, and they were having a meeting point, and the main thing for their meetings is they had a focus, and that was very, very important. Otherwise, she said, it was just all over the place. But the
Yeah.
fact that they had a focus, for example, it would have been 1 year, I don't know, to talk about the symptoms. Maybe the next one was to talk about their purpose. What was it that they wanted to do, or vision for the future. So she was saying that I just confirmed something that I also learned from another elder, that she was saying
Yeah.
that this is very important, and they did it more naturally, organically. It was not using a social technology or some other principles, but it's true. She was saying this is super important when you have meetings to have a focus point.
And the art of it is a question that is big enough that it it gives us plenty of not space for not knowing, which is why it's a question we don't know the answer to and requires the diversity of the system uh, in order to explore.
Yeah.
And so questions that are too small simply try and control us. And questions that are so large, um, we can get lost in them and not necessarily anything can happen. So listening for what's the question in the field that's being called for is part of the art of
This
of
is beautiful what you're saying, because if I transpose what you say a little bit to the world of menopause, is like when you have the different symptoms is like signals, of disruption in your body, in your system, in your life, in your relationships, your work, I don't know, whatever. So the symptom is not just hot flashes. You can have other, like things coming up, but they're like, I see them all as symptoms, but it's more how do you relate to them.
Mhm,
And it's exactly what you said, that what are they trying to tell me?
mhm,
Right? What is
mhm,
the message? What am I
mhm.
supposed to put my attention on? Like, and it's not necessarily the hot flash. It's like,
Correct.
right? It's
Yep.
like, what is it behind it? I'm just trying to put it more to bring it to
Yes.
like a woman in menopause and her world, in her life and everything that comes, like in the people and the jobs and the family and everything and all this in the system, in your individual system. And I'm just trying to um so diversity is also good, the first one, because and the focus on something where, but it is also important to have the uh other ways of seeing it.
Correct.
uh,
Many modalities. It's so in terms of the question, my kind of generic placeholder is given what's happening, what's possible now.
Beautiful.
And in terms of the diversity, when it's just me that I'm talking about, what are the parts of myself, my physical, emotional, mental, spiritual, what do the different parts of me have to say about it? When I'm working with a group, I look at, and I've never tried to apply this to an individual, but I'll bet it does. I look for the parts, the people who are in with authority, resources, expertise, information, and need. And then I look at different demographics, gender, geography, generation, race, class, political affiliation, religion, which of those are relevant. So inviting the diversity of ourselves, the different parts of ourselves at the individual level. And then the last aspect is being hospitable, welcoming who and what shows up.
Beautiful.
Because,
Embracing. Yeah.
yeah, and that I find creates the container, it creates a bubble in the disruption in order to explore. And
Beautiful. Because it is the safe container that you can create with these three tenets, right?
yes, yes, that's
Beautiful.
the intent. Is it gives me the capacity not to give in to my fear or my grief, to be able to be present to them, to not ignore them or deny them, but to transcend and include them in a sense by looking at a more holistic aspect of what's possible. And I find then, and there are many, many, many ways to do that, that there are two actions that make up the nature of self-organizing. Um, and that is to actually show up authentically, to be real with each other, to to not hide, but to show up.
For yourself as well, this. I applied. I think it's the same. Show up for
Yes.
yourself. Show up and be real with yourself, and then
Yep.
be real, right? Like not lie to yourself when you know, and you kind of, I'm going to put this on the side, huh?
Yep. And then to connect with the different parts of
Yeah.
yourself, or to connect with the people that are very different than you, because that's where the discoveries happen.
Yeah.
Because each of us is bringing something that leads us to say, I never thought about it that way. Because in a sense, this whole thing is a quest for meaning
Yeah.
and seeking meaning. So periodically then to stop and reflect together, to notice what is emerging. What are we noticing that holds meaning for all of me or all of us? And often it shows up in the form of generative images, those phrases that catalyze us because they hold some sense of meaning for all of us. And I'm blank. I'm trying to think of an example from work I've done recently. I'll say in the journalism work, the phrase that catalyzed was something that we called engaged journalism, which was the journalism that starts with listening in community. And a community of practice has grown up around this concept of engaged journalism. Um, so, um, I will often actually, one of the big examples was there was a photograph that was taken by one of the early NASA astronauts that was called Earthrise. And it was a picture of the globe in space. And there was something, this is many years ago now, of course, but at the time, it was a catalyzing image of.
It was called the overview effect, right? The overview effect. It was like the fact that you are, for the first time, you see something in its totality from the outside. So it becomes, you're not in it,
Yes,
it comes out.
yes.
Right?
We see ourselves as a system. We see the wholeness that together we make. And those kind of catalyzing images is the emergence of a shift in a sense. And my menopause journey, it was the embracing of my intuitive as well as my rational self, that I was more than just my mind. And it's not like my intellect was the top of a pyramid of a hierarchy, which was how I had looked at it most of my life. But a recognition that I am a whole person, and that all aspects of me are gifts to be valued, and that I am more effective, more wise, um, when I trust and draw from the whole of me.
Beautiful. Beautiful. This is beautiful. And it's a reorganization of our individual system in all our
Yep,
bodies. So it's like if
yep,
the mind takes too much, or if we are too much in the emotional, then maybe it has to balance with being more a bit, it's not, we are different cocktails, right? Each one of us.
yes.
This has been fabulous, and Peggy, and we could talk for a long time, but I invite you, if you, right now, as we are, with all we've looked at, what would you say to a menopausal woman today? Kind of your um, essence of what's, what is a message from
Yes,
you, from you?
a great question. I can tell you the first thing that came up is take heart. Take heart. You will get through this. And trust yourself that, you know, find find the gifts in the journey, and be patient and compassionate. Um, Notice what works and grab hold of it and do more of it and let go. Grieve the parts that are no longer serving you, and and know that um, that greater, a greater you is on the other side. So know it will be a roller coaster. Enjoy the journey, the ups and the downs. Um, and there will be things that you reclaim. About 2 years ago, I started wearing turtlenecks again after having banned them from my wardrobe for 10 years. So know that there are wonderful surprises on the other side,
Beautiful.
and love yourself throughout.
Yeah. This is beautiful. And I loved what you said as well about the container, to create that safe container in the midst of this change, in which you can find an anchoring point, something that helps you regulate, right? To ask some more interesting questions, follow the threads, right, of with the symptoms, the signals, the not ignore things as well. because when they come knocking, right, these are also, that's yeah, beautiful, beautiful.
And thank you for your wonderful questions. It's I haven't thought about these things in years, so you help me get clearer about something I never would have said while going through it, but what a gift it was to
Yeah.
liberate me to discover different parts of myself and embrace them.
Oh, it's an honor, Peggy, and it's really an honor to go and have this conversation together. I learned so much as well in these interactions. It's so rich, and it's the transmission that we need as well to have
Yeah.
between us, because there's so many. These are the gems that I talk about, and each one will pick what is good for them at the right time.
And please continue to share what you're doing. Are you blogging about it? Are you,
I
you know,
plan to. Yeah, right now I'm doing this series, and so I'm just trying to also put out a little bit, go on social media so you can find me, because it's hard work to come out and be seen. You know, like there's so much out there. And I would, yeah, definitely, I will start writing at some point
it,
soon, I hope,
it,
because yeah.
it's an important story to be told. And it's funny. It's as my experience was, I suspect that's relatively common, that it's not something we want to know about until we're in the middle of it. And
Yeah.
and so having resources to hand, um, like you were gathering, I think is a huge gift for women. And so yeah, I consider one of the blogging platforms, like Substack or Medium
I
or
was thinking of
someplace
going
like
on
that.
Substack. Yeah, yeah. I was thinking of going there. Yeah, it's just a lot on the plate, to take it out there. And but yeah, definitely, that's my plan. I think it's a good place to go there. Huh?
Good.
Yeah, yeah,
Well, I'm thrilled to have met you
yeah.
and look forward to more.
Definitely, and thank you so much. And yeah, well, definitely we can get back to applying the change principles to the individual as well. Thank
Indeed.
you, Peggy. Thank you.
Thank
Mm,
you.
yeah,
Take
bye.
care.
Enchanté.